Assalamu alaikum dear students. I hope you are doing wonderful. This is Naeem Haider and we are going to start a very interesting and amazing course, and that is communication and presentation skills. And this is our first lecture. So in this first lecture we will be having an introductory session on communication, and this is the overview of the topics that we will cover in today's class. First of all, we will look at what is communication, and then we'll talk about the internal and external communication, and then we will look at some of the factors that affect the choice of communication, and we will be looking at some of the methods of communication like oral communication, written communication, and visual communications, and we will look at some of the modern methods of communication. So let's get started. First of all, we will look at what is communication. So communication is basically the transfer of information. We can use the word data for information because data is it's a broader term, and that covers all of the types of information. So communication is basically the transfer of information or transfer of data from one person to another. Yeah, that is the simplest definition of communication. And what is internal communication? So internal communication is when people inside the organization they are communicating with each other. So that is basically the internal communication. You are working somewhere or you are studying somewhere, you're part of an organization, and when you are communicating with the people within that organization, that is called internal communication. For example, the notice boards, and the memos, the circulars. Most of the times when you come to campus, you see different type of announcements, different type of information that is displayed on the notice boards. So this is how you are communicating, and that communication is happening at the internal level. Now, what is external communication? External communication is basically communication between the organization and the people outside. When you are a student of a university and you are communicating with people outside your organization, or you are working somewhere, you're an employee somewhere and you're communicating with people outside your organization, so that is external communication. For example, letters, right? And now we will look at some of the factors that we should consider when we are choosing a method of communication. So what are those factors? First of all, we will look at the cost. How costly that communication is for you. Maybe it will require internet, maybe it will require some place. You may need to organize that proceeding or that communication at a mega level, at a mass level, and for that you may need to organize sitting arrangements, and then all of the other formalities that you have to meet. So cost is the first factor that you have to keep in your mind, and you have to see the method you are adopting for the communication, whether it is cheap or it is dear. Yes, you have to look for that. And then you have to look at the speed of the communication. Okay, like how long it will take to reach its destination. Maybe if you are writing a letter, it may take a week, it may take 2 days, 3 days. And if you are writing an email, it will reach instantly. Similarly, if you are sending a WhatsApp message, then you have to keep this in your mind that if the other person is having smooth internet. Similarly, if you are trying to communicate with someone using some online platforms, so these are the factors that you have to keep in your mind. And then you have to keep in mind the secrecy as well. That is also one of the important factors that you should be keeping in your mind when you are communicating. Okay, like for example, in some of the organizations, salaries they are considered confidential. So you have to see that the method you are adopting for the communication, whether that method is confidential or not. And then you have to look for the record of the communication as well. Now sometimes the communication needs to be recorded, so you have to see that whether your communication requires recording or not. You have to ask this question, that will a copy of the information exist or not. So that copy can be a hard copy of the communication in the form of the minutes of meeting, or it can be in the form of some audio recordings, in the form of some video recordings. So you sometimes it is very important that you should keep a record of the communication, whatever the communication is happening. So if you are communicating at a formal level, at an official level, and you are not keeping the record of that, so you may be in trouble later on. So you have to keep this factor at the very beginning of your communication in mind. Then you have to look for the destination as well. You have to see that whether the communication is internal or it is external. Okay, and then you have to see okay, whether it is intranational or it is international. So you have to keep the destination in mind as well, and you have to see that how far it is going. Okay, like is it is whatever you are communicating, is it for some limited number of people, or it is for the public. So you have to keep all of these things in your mind. And then we will look at the three methods of communication, and as I mentioned in the outline of this lecture as well. So what are those three methods of communication? They are the oral or the verbal communication, and then the written communication, and the visual communication, right? So first of all, we will talk about the oral communication. Oral communication is basically sending a verbal message. Verbal message means you have to you can simply understand the oral communication by the word oral. When you are speaking and you're sending a message, you're generating a message using the spoken data, so that is basically the oral communication. Internal, for example, intercom, face to face meetings, your conversation with teachers, your conversation with with the faculty members, other staff, management, HODs. So that is basically if you're doing it in the form of the verbal messages, so that is basically the oral communication. And at external level, it can be like the telephonic conversation, or if you are broadcasting something on radio, so that comes basically at the external communication. And what are the advantages of oral communication? The first advantage of oral communication is that it is quick. And then if you are communicating orally, you can get instant feedback because you are speaking to someone and that person is in front of you, so you can get the instant feedback. So that is one of the key advantages of the oral communication. And what are the disadvantages? If you are orally communicating, so most of the times you don't have any record for that, and then it may be hard to remember. Yes, so these two are the advantages and disadvantages of oral communication. So let's talk about some types of meeting. Okay, so AGM is basically annual general meeting. It mostly happens between the staff, and at university level, when the semester is starting, mostly the faculty, they have a meeting with the management, with the director, with the HODs, to plan about the next semester, to think about the strategies for the improvement, and to make things better. And then we have EGM is basically extraordinary general meeting, when something happens in the middle of the year, or something comes up, and for that all of the faculty members or all of the staff, they need to get together and they need to discuss about the ways or the strategies to meet the requirements. So that is basically the EGM. And then ad hoc meetings, these are basically the informal meetings, or and they are mostly held on the spur of the moment, instantly, like without any plan, something has happened, and all of the faculty or all of the staff is called for the meeting. So that is basically ad hoc based meeting. So there are some of the important persons in every organization, and we need to know about them and their job requirements, their roles. Okay, so let's look at this picture. Okay, how about if we skip these meetings and start doing some work? So this is an employee giving a suggestion, and you can see there is a boss, and these are the members of the staff, and they are having meeting. Now here you can see where boss is sitting and where the other employees are sitting, right? So chairperson is basically the person who calls meeting to order, and then he ensures that meeting runs smoothly. Yes, so these are the basic requirements or the basic responsibilities of chairperson in terms of communication. The chairperson or the leader of an organization, he or she may have to do a lot of other things as well, but we will be focusing on the things that are related to communication. Then there has to be a secretary. Okay, and secretary sends out notices of meetings to the relevant staff, to relevant members of the organization, and he or she writes up the agenda for the meeting. So secretary is basically an assistant to the boss, and he or she plans out things for the organization. and then he or she keeps the minutes of the proceedings, minutes of the meetings, whatever is happening in the organization. The secretary has to keep a record of all those things. Then there is a treasurer, and the treasurer is basically keeps a record of all the finances, and treasurer prepares the final accounts, the dispersal of the salaries, and the rest of the expenditures. So treasurer is basically the finance department, or the accounts department, and the people in the treasurer department, they basically prepare the final reports of whatever is going on in the organization as well. So let's move to the written communication. In written communication, some of the record is kept, okay, and at the internal level, like the notice boards or the memorandums, and at the external level, it is basically the letters, email, faxes, or whatever the communication is happening at the external level. So if you are keeping the record of that communication in written form, so obviously that is the written communication. All right, and the way we were talking about the advantages and disadvantages of oral communication, similarly we will look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of written communication. So the first advantage of written communication is that we can keep a record of that, and then we don't have to remember everything, because we know that we will have the copies of that, or we will have the record of that, and whenever we have to look for something, or whenever we have to refer to something, we know, okay, we have the record of that. And there are some of the disadvantages of written communication as well. The first one is that we cannot have the instant feedback. Yes, so in simple words, whatever is advantageous in oral communication, it becomes disadvantageous in written communication. So it is basically vice versa. And the second disadvantage of written communication is that it may not be confidential. The information may be leaked, or the documents, you're keeping them secret, but your data can be stolen, or someone may sneak in and get into your data, and then it can be problematic for you, right? And then we will talk about the visual communication, and for that you have to look at this pie chart of countries. This is basically how, instead of writing something, or instead of explaining something orally, if you make some charts, or you make some bars or diagrams, and with that, when you explain something, that is basically the visual communication. Now this chart may be talking about some of the data in terms of education, in terms of health facilities, in terms of cultural diversity. So you simply make a chart, and you say, okay, in US it is 20%, in France it's 16%, in Germany it's 32%, in Australia it's 8%, in UK it's 24%. So this one chart explains the things in a very attractive and in a very interesting way, right? So using charts, graphs, videos, and television to give a message internally and externally is basically the visual communication. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of visual communication. So the first advantage of visual communication is that it is easy to understand, because it's interesting. It includes some of the charts, some of the bars, some of the diagrams. So it is basically easy to understand. And then it shows trends and comparisons. It is very easy to compare things, and it is very easy to draw some contrasts among things using the tools of visual communication. And some of the disadvantages of visual communication are that some people may not understand. If you do not know how to read a diagram, or how to read a chart, or how to read some bar graphs, so you may not be able to understand what is happening. And then it takes time to prepare. Yes, you can orally explain things, you can write down certain things, but when it comes to visually explaining things, so you need to have expertise in the tools that you are using, and then obviously it will take some time to prepare the data as well. Now, the last component of our today's lecture is the modern methods of communication. And the first modern method, yes, obviously it is the internet, and we are using internet quite oftenly. And even you are watching this lecture on YouTube, or maybe somewhere else, and you are able to watch this lecture with the help of the internet. So when it comes to communication, so through internet we can send emails, and we can use this World Wide Web to explore certain type of data. And then we have the teleconferencing. particularly after COVID-19, the trend of the teleconferencing has increased, and now we have different methods, different platforms like Google Meet and Microsoft Teams and Zoom, and we can have teleconferencing even on WhatsApp as well. So it's up to 20 people, and even more than 20 people can be part of that teleconferencing, and they can talk together. And then we have this video conferencing as well, where TV link up of sound and pictures for meetings without travel. We can have that, like people sitting in their own places, sitting in their own houses or in their own offices, they can communicate with the rest of the people using the video conferencing. So let's have a recap of this lecture. Today we discussed what is communication, and we talked about the internal and external communication. We looked at the factors affecting the choice of communication. We talked about the methods of communication, and in methods of communication we talked about the oral and written and visual communication, and then we looked at some of the modern methods of communication. So that is for today. In next lecture we will be exploring some other interesting topic of communication and presentation skills, and for that you can check the description, and in description you will find a link from where you can have access to all of the lectures from the beginning to the end. Stay connected, take care of yourself. See you in the next class. Allah Hafiz.